If you started playing after Mists of Pandaria, you might be more accustomed to the talent rows we have today, and not very much the talent trees of old. This video will go over the general changes to talent trees as a whole, and not really the specifics of the talents themselves. The very first talent trees in WoW's alpha was way different than anything we got in-game. It was basically this weird interface window similar to the class trainer table, which allowed you to spend talent points to get various different skills and passives that allowed you to hyper specialize your class. You got about 10 talent points a level, and each skill cost about 10 talent points to learn. So if you wanted to be really good with an axe, for example, you could spend talent points into increasing its damage, hit chance, crit, and chance to parry with it. Or give yourself some extra damage to only beast types, increase your base stats, magical power, resistances to specific types of magic. It was surprisingly robust. Although it might have been too hyper-focused, as it was eventually dropped and replaced with the more traditional talent tree we're all familiar with. With Vanilla WoW, we got the 31-point talent trees. You got 1 new point for each new level starting at level 10. So once you hit level 60, you had 51 talent points to spend. You could spend the talent points however you wanted across the 3 trees, but usually the better abilities were buried deep in the tree, so you'd be incentivized to spend points in one tree to get all the way down to the last talent. Although being Vanilla WoW and the worst balance the game has ever been, a lot of the 31st talent points were bad or not worth grabbing. Feral Druid's last talent just reduced the mana cost of shapeshifting by about 25 or 30%. The Survival Hunter tree's last talent was for Lacerate, one of the worst talents in the game's history, as it did terrible damage and scaled poorly. So in order to fix some of these problems, Blizzard decided to do class overhauls halfway through vanilla, starting with Hunters, because for some reason, Blizzard decided it would be a good idea to only focus on one class at a time each patch. Not that they couldn't adjust all specs with each patch, they made a very purposeful decision to only do one at a time. And because of this, people would go crazy on the forums and say their class needed to be fixed next, which led to the infamous bus shock incident. In order to prep for class overhauls, Blizzard asked the forums for feedback on certain classes at certain times. When it was the Shaman's turn to have its discussion, the community manager in charge of the Shamans got sick that week and missed it, so they had another CM replace him. Then, when the next patch came out, they did Shamans and Mages at the same time. Mages got a whole bunch of good and much needed changes to their class, and Shamans got 1 buff and a ton of nerfs. So, like what happens today, the Shaman forums went nuts and blamed the CM for the nerfs and pinned it on the week he got sick. But he didn't respond to any of the criticism, except for one thread that said he should get hit by a bus. And thus, the bus shock incident, because Shamans use shocks, of course. In the Burning Crusade, classes got 2 new rows of talents for 41-point talent trees. Just like in Vanilla, you got 1 talent every new level until level 70. The Burning Crusade was the golden age of hybrid builds. Many classes had really good abilities that combined well with abilities in other talent trees in the earlier tiers, like Warlocks and their infamous SLSL build, where they went halfway down in 2 trees to pick up Soul Link and Siphon Life to be nearly unkillable in PvP while dishing out a ton of dot damage. Now, since this video is about the history of the trees and not the history of hybrid specs, which could be a whole video on its own, I'll leave it at there and move on to Wrath talents. With Wrath of the Lich King, players got 2 new rows of talents again, for a 51-point talent tree. With this huge tree, Wrath of the Lich King had the biggest talent tree in the game's history. And with these new bigger trees, it was a little harder to hybrid as Blizzard moved potentially really good combo abilities higher on the list, so they couldn't be comboed. Or just straight up put exceptions in their abilities, like with Readiness and Bestial Wrath. Readiness was a hunter talent that reset the cooldown of all of your other abilities, and Bestial Wrath was an insanely good BM Hunter cooldown that made you immune to CC for 18 seconds as well. So in order to stop hunters from taking both abilities to have nearly 40 seconds of CC immunity, they just added an exclusion of resets the cooldowns of all of your hunter abilities except Bestial Wrath. And to even further force people to play pure builds, they put some of the best abilities the class could get at the 51st spot. To use Hunters as an example again, Survival Hunters got Explosive Shot as the last talent, and that one ability accounted for half of a Survival Hunter's ray damage, making it absolutely necessary to take. This was also the expansion that introduced dual talent specialization. What this meant was you could have 2 sets of talents saved at a time, and then swap between them whenever you wanted, at the cost of a long cast time, needing to be out of combat, and losing all of your mana. But it also swapped over your bars like swapping specs today does. This was a much welcome change to talent specs, as now healers and tanks didn't have to go back to town to respec if they were needed to DPS, and vice versa. Hunters had many talent trees for their pets added this expansion, which stayed in the game until Mists. Hunter pets got 3 different talent trees depending on which kind of pet they were, started earning talent points at level 20, and gained a new one every 4 levels, for a total of 16 points at max level. Plus, BM Hunter's final talent gave them about 5 more talent points to spend, which was a nice little bonus to pet damage. Wrath is also the expansion that introduced glyphs to modify your abilities and classes even further, because this was when glyphs could still give DPS upgrades and not just cosmetic changes, making Wrath one of the most customizable expansions for your character based on just the pure amount of it. Then in Cataclysm, they wanted to fix the mass amount of talents and cut them in half. Now you would only get a new talent every 2 levels, and you couldn't pick talents in other trees until you had spent enough talents in the tree you'd pick first. But in exchange for being forced to a spec, you got special abilities right off the bat when you picked a talent tree, plus major passive buffs. With Cataclysm, Blizzard was finally able to kill the hybrid specs once and for all by not allowing you to progress far enough in another tree to even attempt it. People had mixed opinions on these new trees, but since most players just net deck talent tree choices anyway, it's not like having fewer of them really made a difference at max level. Plus, with a smaller tree, the talent points gave better bonuses with every 2 levels than the old ones did when the trees were huge and all of the increases were minor. But then come Mists of Pandaria, and the end of the talent trees as we know it. Mists of Pandaria decided to just remove talent trees altogether, and instead give players a new talent row choice system, where every 15 levels or so, you get to pick 1 of 3 talents. Each one was supposed to be either a powerful passive or a new ability altogether, with some rows sharing themes, like one row being nothing but movement abilities and stuff. And the talents were shared across all 3 specs. You just chose a spec, and then the talents would sometimes have multiple effects to account for different specs. Also, instead of having to go to a trainer to reset your talents, you could use an item to change 1 talent row at a time, per charge of said item, or go to a trainer to reset all rows at once. In Warlords of Draenor, they also added 1 more row to the talents, giving classes 7 rows of talents and just adding an extra row at level 100. So you still got a new talent every 15 levels, until level 90 when you got your next row in 10 levels at level 100. They also modified glyphs to no longer give major DPS boosts, and be almost purely situational improvements, give self-heals, and change the functionality of abilities, which sometimes did increase their damage slightly anyway. Then in Legion, they modified talent rows a little further by making them spec-specific, and doing away with multi-spec. Now, all of your specs just had their own bars and talent points, just like swapping talents with the old dual talent specialization. In order to change out talents, you had to use an item that would allow you to change all of your talents within a 1-minute window, or go back to a rested area to freely change them, which means you no longer had a reason to ever go back to your class trainer. Legion also introduced the PvP talents. Only available at max level, you could unlock talents by grinding out honor, and the talents only became active in PvP scenarios. This talent tree also worked on the pick 1 of 3 abilities principle that the regular talent tree operates on. Glyphs that improve or alter your class's abilities were completely removed in Legion, and glyphs are now almost purely cosmetic. Now, as a little side note, with the introduction of Demon Hunters and them starting off at level 98, they get a new talent every 2 levels until level 110, being the only class that doesn't have all of its talents at level 100, and also being one of the most fun classes to level, since you get a new ability every 2 levels. And now, onto the newest expansion, Battle for Azeroth. With BFA, Blizzard made absolutely no changes to the talent tree, again, for the second expansion in a row. This is the longest we've gone without getting a new row of talents or talent changes, with Legion and now BFA. But instead, they revamped the PvP talents to be an option where you can choose any combination of 3 plus a CC break talent for a potential of 4 extra talents if you choose to use War Mode. But these talents are only active in the open world with War Mode on, and of course in PvP scenarios, so they make no difference in raid or dungeon settings. And that's the history of talent trees for as far as we know it. There were also a lot of changes to glyphs, but I'm going to cover those in a different video, so I only briefly mentioned them in this one. I personally vastly prefer the talent tree style of old, as it made leveling more fun, getting a small little boost of power each level. But at max level, the talent system we have now is better to work with, I hate to admit. What do you guys think? Did you like the old talent trees, or do you prefer the new talent rows?